I just cannot help but remember a time in Davos, about 7, 8 years ago. And I was walking to the bar there to get a coffee, and I passed a figure almost hiding behind a curtain, sitting in a chair. And I turned around and I saw that it was Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Why don't you ever interview me? And I'm a little shocked. And I said, well, actually, I've been trying for years and you've never accepted. And he never set it up, or Netanyahu never accepted.
Yeah, he's a big talker about interviews, but when it comes to actually delivering a fair, tough interview, he'd prefer to go on Fox, I guess.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of The X-Files with me, Christiane Amanpour and Jamie Rubin. I've been a long-time correspondent for CNN in the field, from Iran to all over, for about 35 years. Now I have my own program in which I try to hold world leaders accountable.
And I'm Jamie Rubin, and I've been a senior State Department official under two presidents, Bill Clinton and Joe Biden.
And we've also been a married couple, but we're now divorced, hence The X-Files.
And we thought, if we can talk, if we can address the chaos facing the world right now from our different perspectives across an ocean and across a divorce, then maybe world leaders can do it as well.
And boy, do we need that. We need some real leadership. So hopefully it'll spur lots of people across a lot of very difficult partisan divides to actually get together for our common future. How's that for lofty?
That's lofty.
That is lofty. So this week it is very serious, as it always is, but now we're talking about a brand new war started in the Middle East with Israel's massive strikes on Iran bursting out of the decades-long shadow war they've had together, now into a direct confrontation with Iran retaliating. So we're going to try to address this week, what does this actually mean in terms of trying to control Iran's nuclear program? Will this attack backfire? Could it provoke Iran into actually going for a bomb, which it has not done as of this moment? And furthermore, is this about regime change? We are going to launch this episode, and I think the really big question is, will this backfire? Will it make Iran finally go underground, so to speak, more than just physically, and go for the bomb that it has not yet built? Jamie, what do you think?
Well, that is the hard question. Look, I've been studying the question of nuclear proliferation my entire life. My first job, Christiane, as you remember, was working on nuclear arms control during the Reagan administration for Joe Biden and then for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee when treaties began. So I understand this nuclear question very well. One of the things that most people in the world don't appreciate is that the Iranians have been building the capability to make a nuclear weapon by building the hardest part, enriching uranium to a degree that it's necessary for a weapon. But since at least the mid-2000s, they have not been seeking to weaponize that capability.
I think it was early 2000s.
Yeah, early 2000s. They made a decision after initially having an actual weapons program in the late 90s, early 2000s. They chose to stop it. Now, that doesn't mean they stopped building the capability. And they've now crossed many thresholds they've never crossed before of having enriched uranium to higher and higher percentages. But even if you get 90% enriched uranium, which is what you need for a weapon, you still have to turn that into a weapon. And then you have to test that weapon, doing exactly what North Korea has done. Iran hasn't done those things, and as far as I know, hasn't tried to do those things in recent years. So the question that you addressed is the crucial question. By attacking their capability in all these mountain hideouts and these enrichment facilities, will they provoke Iran to actually go covertly and begin weaponizing this nuclear material and perhaps even testing a nuclear weapon? That would be the ultimate backfire for Israel's war.
Just to be clear, when you said in the early 2000s they, had a weapons program, that wasn't physical, was it? It was about diagrams and sort of building blocks, but not actually enriched uranium. But what did that turn out to be? Because this is actually crucial, because Benjamin Netanyahu and his government has said that they have intelligence now that Iran is moving towards building a bomb. And that was not the
And
intelligence a few months ago.
you're absolutely right. Look, I left the government 6 months ago, and without getting into any details, I was very, very focused on this question because I have been my whole life. And as far as I can tell, there was not, as of 6 months ago, any real drive towards weaponizing the enriched uranium that they are now building in droves, that the capability they're building, which is real, enriched uranium, increasingly the amounts and increasingly the percentages, but that still has to be weaponized, has to be tested in a device. What we found back in the 2000s was that they took certain steps towards weaponizing. They had a program, they had scientists, they did some weapon type testing, but then they stopped it. And then they began to try to negotiate with the West. Now, whether they've done a good job of negotiating or we have is a whole nother question. But the suggestion that this military operation was premised on stopping an urgent rush by Iran towards a bomb, as best as I can tell, is not accurate.
I want to tell you a little story, which I didn't really report at the time because it was a conversation. In about 2002, I think, I was in Afghanistan. The Iranian ambassador to Afghanistan invited me to the embassy for a conversation. I had known him, in fact, from Bosnia when he was ambassador. And he told me, because I asked him about a nuclear program, because, things were brewing about whether George W. Bush was going to go after Iraq and all the rest of it. And he said to me, frankly, that yes, there had been a discussion before about whether we as a regime should go and weaponize this bomb, this material, and go for the bomb. And then he said we had a very long conversation with all the stakeholders in the government, and we decided flat out that we would not do that, that it was too dangerous and it would put us in more danger and it would not make us safer. So I think that also is important, but it also goes, Jamie, to the origins of all of this. This has been going on for decades. This row between Iran, the United States, and Israel, primarily over the nuclear program.
You're exactly right. Look, when we first got together in the 90s, late 90s, Iran's push for nuclear capability was a central concern of the Clinton administration, obviously of the Israeli government. At that time, they were far, far less advanced than they are today. And the reason for it was because the reason for the concern was because Iran and the United States were, at loggerheads. Israel and Iran were at loggerheads. And I remember how important it was to figure out whether Iran was really rushing towards a bomb and how to negotiate with them. But this issue of Iran being the ultimate enemy of the United States, and the United States being, as the Iranians put it, the supreme arrogance. What did they used to call
Great
it?
Satan.
The great arrogance.
The great Satan.
And the great Satan and the great arrogance as well. Anyway, this is a threshold question, but considering the war going on right now on a daily basis, being premised on stopping Iran's nuclear possibility, I think we should address, and we have already, but we should address it further, of whether this decision to start using military force against the Iranian nuclear program has actually been a wise move. And let me give you an example of why I'm concerned. President Trump has been involved in this, and it's unclear to what extent he approved this operation or wanted it to happen. Under President Biden, we had real war diplomacy because remember, the Israelis attacked Iran back in the Biden administration. And what we were able to do then is do real war diplomacy. And that was we would give Israel the THAAD, the most complicated and effective defense system. We would give Israel a full-fledged regional defense architecture with the United States, the British, the French, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, all our aircraft carriers, our Aegis cruisers, which are regional defense systems, and aircraft as well. And we would use all that to defend Israel against Iranian retaliation if they limited their attacks to their air defense systems of Iran and their missile systems of Iran. And they didn't attack oil facilities, the nuclear program, or the leadership because there was a risk of a wider war and a question whether attacking the nuclear facilities would backfire.
Okay.
And so that was real war diplomacy.
Yeah.
I don't think that kind of thing is going on right now. Trump claims it is, but neither the Israelis nor the Trump administration appear to have any idea of how to end this war. It's just going to go on and on and on. We're talking weeks, if not months.
Clearly, and I thought about it immediately when I read the list of those who had been assassinated on the first night. One of them is Ali Shamkhani. Ali Shamkhani was a defense minister briefly. He was either head of the Navy or very serious senior position in the Navy. But now he is Khamenei, the so-called supreme leader's man, to shepherd and direct Iran's nuclear negotiations with the United States. They killed him. And that means it's a direct attack, in my analysis, on the idea of negotiations. Bibi Netanyahu has never wanted negotiations. And my view and my question to that is, when people say, oh, negotiations have failed, which is what Israel says, hence we had to take different steps. Actually, they were successful under Obama in 2015. They did form a not perfect but good arms control regime. It was working. Iran didn't have the level of enriched uranium and the quantity that it does now. But this was a successful campaign to end the negotiation process, the diplomatic
exactly right.
process.
You're exactly
and they got
right.
Trump. They couldn't convince Israel or their government, any other American president, but finally they get Donald Trump, who thinks potentially that this war is just another negotiating gambit. And let them do it.
That's exactly right. And that's why I worry about what I call Trump's weakness in the area of war diplomacy. This is some high stakes stuff. It's not some real estate game where you can say, oh, this is just good for the negotiations. This is a very complex thing, arms control with the Iranians. And you have to know a lot about the technical and the potential diplomatic possibilities. You're exactly right. This Israeli regime, Netanyahu, has always hated the idea of an agreement with Iran in the nuclear field. Some Israeli leaders, like Ehud Barak and others, believe that we were better off under the Obama Accord. I believe that because we had controlled Iran's rush to build enough enriched uranium, not a bomb, but enough enriched uranium. We had set that back by something like to a year. We would know that it would take them a year to get enough enriched uranium. That's what the Obama deal did. Now, it had its weaknesses. And believe me, I wasn't a full fan of the agreement. I thought it was better to have it than not have it. And I thought it was important to frame it as an arms control agreement, not a regime fixing problem, that we were going to open up to China the way the Obama people described it. That was a big mistake. It was just an arms control agreement. We were better off having it than not having it. And Netanyahu has always hated arms control with the Iranians because he's a maximalist. He wants them to just capitulate and give up. And that doesn't strike me as very likely for a regime that is so extreme and that insists on its own, personality and its own dignity. And so the idea that the Iranians are going to capitulate now, even though Israel has air superiority and even though Israel is very effective, seems unlikely to me. I don't know. You're an Iranian based, half of your father was Iranian. What do you think about the Iranian people's willingness or the regime's willingness to capitulate, which is what Israel and Trump is asking for?
Well, the regime doesn't seem under any maximum or any other kind of pressure over 45 years to have capitulated over anything. You're right. The JCPOA was a deal that would have provided them with sanctions relief and provided everybody else with nuclear security and assuredness under very tough monitoring regime. But what I do know is that the people who have no love for their regime, as we've seen the Green Revolution in 2009, the Woman Life Freedom Revolution uprising in 2022. The majority of the people of Iran, after 45 years, are fed up with this regime for many, many reasons, including the lack of freedom, including the dictatorship, including putting, any kind of uprising down violently, and including the horrendous economy inter alia because of the sanctions. Yes, there's been economic mismanagement, but the sanctions over decades. But even though they want the end of this regime, or at least the majority, now that I'm talking to people inside Iran and friends who have friends and family, and I still have family, right now they're scared. Right now, they have no idea what's going to happen. Right now, they see that Israel is attacking, including civilian structures, including apartment blocks, which are not just complexes for the military. I know for a fact that they got one top military leader on the Friday morning, but the place practically collapsed and civilians were trapped in it. So I know that that's being repeated. And I also know, because I asked the Israeli ambassador to London, I said yesterday, are you into regime change? Is this what's all about? Because you may not be able to set the nuclear thing back significantly. She said, no, we are not into regime change. As you know, it didn't work out very well for America in Iraq and elsewhere. But that flies in the face of evidence because they've expanded their targets away from just the military, the missiles, and the nuclear to what is civilian infrastructure and buildings and a densely populated capital city, Tehran. And of course, they're getting retaliation. But also, Netanyahu, and we're going to play this for a second, Netanyahu has said in Persian that people should take their destiny into their own hands.
I don't think that Israeli ambassador knows what he was talking about, or she was talking about. Go ahead, play this clip.
Because he also said it to Fox News, by the way, that they were encouraging Iranians to take their destiny.
For your amusement, other Israeli ambassadors have said that Khamenei is on the target list. I don't think their diplomatic corps knows what they're talking about.
Well, yes, and so that would be regime change. Allegedly, also Trump, apparently, according to reporting, vetoed it. But let's just play Netanyahu, and it's not the first time he's addressed the Iranian people to rise up.
This is your opportunity to stand up and let your voices be heard. Woman, life, freedom. Zan, Zandegi, Azadi.
He said woman, life, freedom, and that was directly referencing the last 2022 uprising after the death in custody in Iran of the woman Mahsa Amini. And since then, Jamie, he has said on Fox News that this military campaign could very well result in the toppling of the Islamic Republic because the regime in Iran is very weak.
Well, I think the Israeli assessment of the regime in Iran is as flawed as many of their other assessments. Israeli intelligence likes to brag a lot about what they can do, and they do some great things, as we've seen. But this is the same as Israeli intelligence that had no clue that Hamas was going to attack them on October 7th. And so when they throw out Israeli intelligence, one should be skeptical. I am skeptical that Israel has a good assessment of the stability of the Iranian regime. Why am I skeptical? Because throughout our marriage and since then, we've observed what happens when the Iranian people stand up and try to call for changes in at least policies of the regime, let alone regime change. And what do? They have thousands of monstrous security people who shoot and kill anyone who wants to change the regime. That hasn't changed. This regime is maybe scared now because they are vulnerable, but they are not about to fall. And any judgment about launching a regional war based on an assessment that weak would be foolhardy in the extreme. So regime change may or may not be their policy. They can't seem to figure out what it is. But I don't think it's a sensible approach because it's not highly likely. And more importantly, it doesn't address how to end this war. What's their strategy? Israeli officials, especially Netanyahu, are good at starting these wars, good at continuing these wars, but they don't seem very good at getting their long-term objectives achieved. If they had been, we would be in a situation where all of the regional allies, and we can get into this later, would be on Israel's side against Iran, because they would have made a deal on Gaza. They would have achieved a recognition by Saudi Arabia, and there would be a regional defense system with Israel accepted by its neighbors, confronting an Iranian regime that was attacking those neighbors through Hezbollah and through the Assad regime. But Israel said no to that. Bibi said no to that. And what do we have? A war, an endless war in Gaza. And now we don't know about how long a war is going to go on with Iran. And we don't seem to see an Israeli strategy to achieve their long-term objectives. That worries me.
Okay, so it is worrying. And the question, of course, is where does the most important and powerful country and the biggest ally of Israel, America, stand? And we're going to talk about that in the second part of our conversation, but also tell really interesting stories that we haven't really told before about the various times Iran and top leaders tried to make openings to the United States and tried to close the file, so to speak, on this.
We have some good, juicy stories, that's for sure.
Some of them. Okay, when we come back. So we're back, the X's, and we're going to tell some stories about our encounters with senior members of the Iranian government, trying to get closer and essentially close the file on the ongoing conflict with the United States. It started, I think, with the exclusive interview I got in 1998, January 98, with the reform president of Iran, Mohammad Khatami. Now, anti-Iranians will say there's no such thing as reform or moderates, but there are. There is a stripe of various political, colors, just as there are in Israel, just as there are in the United States. They're the hardliners, and then they're the less hardliners. Cut to, I got the exclusive interview with that new president. Me and my colleague, Parisa Khosravi, and I'm going to put her in there too, because we both went to Iran, two girls, women, and we managed to win the exclusive away from all the other major competition. But what was interesting, Jamie, and you might remember, that we had just got engaged about a week before that interview, and I was nervous about how I was going to conduct this interview. And we were in Trinidad and Tobago, and we together figured out how to ask the main question about addressing Americans. And of course, at that time, the hostages were a nightmare and a hangover for America. The hostages that the early Iranian revolution had taken for more than a year, 52 Americans for 444 days in the Tehran embassy. Jamie, do you remember how you told me to phrase it?
Well, yes,
how you suggested I phrase it? Because God forbid I was doing the government's bidding.
God forbid. Look, you and I knew there were three public issues between Iran and the United States: the nuclear question, Israel, and the regional Hezbollah terrorism account. Those were the public issues. We knew you were going to address that. But we talked about what would really have an impact on people. And I said, look, my whole life, since I was a student, Iran's taking of the hostages was a taboo breaking event, which really made Americans hate Iran, hate the regime, that they did something that hadn't ever been done before, take an entire embassy hostage during their revolution. And so I said, if we could get an Iranian leader who really wanted to show he was different to express some regret for that, that would have impact on people who average Americans and Americans beyond the policy community, which was always going to focus on the three big policy issues. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I said to you. And then I think we sat down because you were a very careful preparer of things, and we sat down very carefully and constructed what I think was a brilliant question, if I must say so myself, with our combined wit.
Well,
to say it exactly right and get the right result.
Yeah, and we did. I did, and I'm just going to say that I'm a journalist, and I just asked my fiance for some advice. This was nothing to do with anything but a good interview and getting a good answer, because it was very frustrating. And by the way, I was a student in Iranian in America while the hostages were taken.
You saw
and it was
what
not
effect
pleasant
it had.
being an Iranian in America at that time. So it was a longish question, and there was a longish answer. Here's the nut of what I did.
Would you say that taking the American hostages at the beginning of the Iranian Islamic Revolution falls into the category of early revolutionary excesses?
With regard to the hostage issue which you raised, I do know that the feelings of the great American people have been hurt, and of course I regret it.
So he said it, and he said some really interesting things also about the Palestinians, Hamas, and the nuclear issue. At that time, they didn't have a nuclear reactor at all. Even the civilian reactor had not been completed at Bushehr. But you were a government spokesman when that interview was played out for a whole hour on CNN. We don't do that stuff anymore, but it was really a manifesto by a new-looking, new-thinking Iranian president.
It was a very important moment. Remember, back in 1998, when this was, the 90s were filled with real world-shaking events. You know, the fall of communism, Tiananmen Square. You know, it was around that time. South Africa. All these things were happening, and so the question was, could one of these last big divides be bridged? Iran and the United States. And so your interview was a major event in Washington policy. And the whole government of the United States under Clinton, Madeleine Albright, and Sandy Berger had a lot of discussions about how to respond. And in the end, there were basically two kinds of responses. I think President Clinton said something short, and then I had the State Department response. I still think it was a decent response. I know the Iranians ended up complaining about it, but they always had something to complain about. And we really did respond to the essence of the interview, because remember, Madeleine Albright ended up giving a speech in which she did what they asked: make real sanctions changes. We lifted sanctions on pistachios, carpets, and what am I forgetting? Caviar. All right, that was real. And they ended up, instead of taking that as a yes, they ended up focusing on two words, where she said Khamenei was the unelected leader because we didn't regard him as a democratically elected president or leader.
Which he wasn't. He was the supreme leader, yeah.
And instead of taking yes for an answer, remember, in the end, Khatami was trying to change things, but the regime wouldn't let him. Yeah, and if he had succeeded back then, the whole world would have been different for the Iranian people. Yeah. Sanctions would have been lifted. They would have been brought into the modern world. They wouldn't have to rely on Russia and China and the rogue regimes to survive. And Israel wouldn't have even dreamed of attacking them if they had transformed their country in relations with the United States. Yeah. That was a missed opportunity.
Because what Madeleine did in the conversation that you're just saying, the speech she had, was also match Khatami. Don't forget, he expressed regret for the hostage crisis. Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State, on behalf of the US government, expressed regret for the American role in the coup launched against then democratically elected Prime Minister Mossadegh in 1953, which launched a whole load of American coups, Latin America, Central America, Africa, and all the rest of it, and backfired spectacularly, essentially all over the place. So that also was interesting. But let's now move on to another instance. A few years later, after Khatami's 2 terms were over, then the old president, Rafsanjani, who also eventually was considered as more of a moderate and less of a hardliner, and also wanted to send out, an olive branch to the United States, called me. They literally lifted a ban that I'd been under for some reporting I'd done. And we did a live interview on CNN where he said, Rafsanjani, in 2005, that I want to end all of this. I want to use my presidency to meet, America in a diplomatic space and try to resolve all these issues. Again, a first time for an Iranian president. But he didn't win. The horrendous Ahmadinejad won, and things went crashingly downhill from there.
Let's tell a story we've never told, and I think is revealing of the Iranian desire to always find a negotiating solution to their problems. And they get very dramatic about it, but maybe they don't negotiate properly in the end because they don't end up getting what they wanted. But remember how they reached out, the group of Iranian inside the government, the Rafsanjani types in the intelligence community, in the diplomatic community, and they reached out to you to try to meet with us. Maybe you can start that story and I'll add to it.
Well, I'm a journalist, and all I wanted to do is do the interviews. They actually wanted to meet with you because they thought you, as a former government official, which you were at that time, former, but I believe you were working at that time on the Hillary Clinton campaign of 2007.
Not quite. I was at Sky
No,
News, but
true,
I was.
but you were a
planning to,
Clinton
yes.
holdover,
Yes.
and they thought Hillary would win the
So did I.
nomination. Of course, Obama did. And they wanted to get to you to try to send a message that we want to end this and we want to make, resolve these outstanding issues. So,
well, right. Let me take the drama from there, and you can cut in when you think I've overdone it or talked on too long. So yes, they wanted to talk to someone in the democratic world. And they saw me, I think, as someone very close
democratic policies in politics in America.
Democratic Party world. And they saw me as someone close to Hillary, and they probably imagined that she was going to be president and I might be national security advisor. And they thought, great, Christiane.
Cool your jets.
That's what they thought. I didn't think it. They thought it. Those jets don't need to be cooled. I'm being precise. So they reached out to you, and we started meeting them secretly. I think first in Dubai, then in Geneva. And we had 3 meetings, and they were all quite dramatic. They made us give up our phones and take them apart and walk 20 yards away from the phone and then discuss how to talk between the United States and Iran. Those meetings, I think, took place over a year, a couple or 3 of them. And then they actually invited me to Iran. And we went, plausibly as a family. Darius, we took with us because we thought this was a unique opportunity for him to meet your side of the family. And this was something they spent a lot of time on. I know how these things work. When we arrived, I don't know if you remember this, but a deputy foreign minister, someone in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, met us at the plane and took us, through their system without any trouble. And they said they had given up on trying to negotiate with the Bush administration. I think the 2006 elections had either happened or were about to happen, and they knew there was changes coming in our politics. And then the Democrats did win in 2006 and then won in 2008, so they were right about that. But they also had sort of goofy ideas, that.
What did the Democrats win in 2006?
The Congress. We won it back.
Ah.
We took the Congress back.
Right.
In the midterm elections, which I hope we'll do again in a year and a half. In any event, and they wanted to develop a relationship with the United States in which they could begin to bring Iran out of the box, the containment that they were in, by working with potential Hillary Clinton administration. And of course, that's what Obama ended up doing. So they were on point. I don't think Obama and them did it very well, and we've referred to that in the part 1. But the point was that they used the opportunity to try to break through the divide, the generational, civilizational divides that prevented Iran and the United States from talking to each other. I reported it to the CIA watcher in London. I reported it to the FBI because I wanted to get a clearance in the future, and I thought it was the right thing to do. And then I reported it to Obama's top officials. I said, the Iranian government is reaching out big time. They want to make a change. They want to make an agreement. They want to negotiate with the United States. And
so
Obama
this is Obama as
that.
the campaigner. He wasn't yet president.
Right.
Or maybe afterwards you did as well. I actually took all that stuff and all the background, conversations, which they were, or even off the record. And I wrote something for CNN Digital. I remember that because I'd been approached several times because as we remember, CNN was also viewed as a bridge in those days. It was pretty much the only international, media that really covered the world in a serious and in-depth manner. And so I wrote up some of that stuff. But didn't they say to you, why don't you bring Secretary, oh no, back then she was Senator Clinton, here, and it'd be great for her campaign and we can make peace? What did they say?
Well, this shows you is that they love the drama, but they don't always get our politics. So this was at the height of the battle between Obama and Clinton for the nomination. And they actually thought it might be good for her to come to Iran on a big trip that was, highly publicized and reach out to the Iranian people and make peace in the, so Nixon went to China. But they didn't understand that in order to get elected, you needed to get elected first. Nixon didn't do that until after he was elected. And he told the Republican
By
Party—
being hardline, by the way.
Right. And he told the Republican Party he was going to be making an opening to China. He might not have been the nominee. So it's not the kind of thing you do during primaries or you do during election campaigns. It's the kind of things you do once you're president. And even then, you don't travel very often to the root of the evil regimes like North Korea or Iran. Usually send somebody, like Madeleine Albright was sent to North Korea.
In 2000, then Trump put his foot over the DMZ, so officially he's been in North Korea.
Yeah, he didn't go to Pyongyang, though.
No, he didn't go to Pyongyang. Okay, so a lot of, in my opinion, missed opportunities. Somebody will say, some people listening will say there was never a chance because that's just the way it is. There was never a real chance. But a lot of missed opportunities for Iran and the United States to resolve this huge issue, a la Nixon goes to China, which is a pretty relevant comparison. And in the end, the skeptics, the Israelis, the Republicans in Congress, even then the Saudi Crown Prince, MBS, prevailed upon Trump to pull out of that deal. And here is where we are now, and it's gone much further. Not a Trump negotiated peace, but a war between Israel and Iran, which Trump said he didn't want. We are going to talk more about this when we come back. Okay, so we're back to talk now a bit more about America's role in this current war and what will happen, what can Trump do. First of all, let me just observe that every issue of mega importance on the international stage that Trump said he would fix in however many hours or days has in fact got worse. Russia is doing much worse damage and harm to Ukraine. Israel has been doing much more damage and harm and a siege on Gaza and the Palestinian people there. And now, instead of a negotiated deal with Iran, Israel, with apparently his green light, is in a full-scale war with Iran. So what next, Jamie?
Well, you're right. A couple of weeks ago, we did this program, and I predicted the possibility that Iran would be an opportunity for Trump to really make a peace agreement, an actual nuclear agreement that could stop a war and prevent a threat. And I said if he won the Nobel Prize, great. That was his most likely opportunity. It was the most ripe. The Iranians were ripe for an agreement, for negotiations, for diplomacy. Obviously, Netanyahu didn't want to see that happen. So what happens now? Well, Trump has a decision to make. There's a divide inside the Trump administration between the true MAGA America Firsters who want to avoid wars everywhere and avoid American involvement abroad, and the hardline pro-Israel supporters who want to see Israel go all the way and change the regime, or at least Lindsey Graham is one of those, or at least make sure they've destroyed the nuclear program. That debate is going on, and it will be important because if Trump learns anything from this and the administration learns anything from this, there's an opportunity for war diplomacy. Israel needs American help if they're going to ever destroy the Fordo facility where the enrichment could take place covertly, deep underground. We have a weapon. It's called the MOP, the Mass Ordnance Penetrator or something like that. We could help them.
30,000 kilos, right?
Yeah, if we did, we would be wise, the way Biden did with the THAAD missile system, to leverage that into a war-ending diplomacy so that we can not see this war go on indefinitely. Meanwhile, there's the question of whether the U.S. will support Israel in the incoming missiles into Israel. I think it's going on. But oddly enough, the Trump administration, think about this, if the Democrats were doing this, we'd be getting screamed at. The Trump administration isn't admitting how they're helping to defend Israel, how they're using aircraft carriers and other weapons, defensive systems in the region to attack Iranian missiles and drones going to Israel. They're not talking about it. I think it's happening, but they're not talking about it. And that's
why do you think it's happening?
Well, I think I know it's happening because I have sources in the military who've told me what's going on. It's not happening as strongly as it was under Biden when we had an Aegis cruiser and we had an aircraft
Right.
carrier battle group and all of the aircraft in the
And
region.
none of the
But it
other
is
allies
happening.
are involved, right? I mean, the UK, France,
Certainly not
all
the
those
Saudis.
others.
Think about this.
Yeah.
Right? The French and the British were involved last time.
Yeah.
Now, they may get involved slowly, especially if Iran is stupid enough to start attacking wider targets.
Do you think the Israelis will try to? Do you think they'll try to provoke it? They need the U.S. to come in if they're going to go down.
Yes, I think they're going to be pushing very hard on Trump and using all their cards to try to get the Americans to help them destroy the nuclear program. And I personally might be supportive of that if it was part of a strategy. I would, in fact, leverage that for Netanyahu finally ending this bloody war in Gaza that's going on as we speak, with dozens dying. There are more Palestinians dying in Gaza than Iranians dying in the Israeli attacks, and nobody's paying attention to it. That war is the root of the problem in the region. Until that war ends, Israel cannot be recognized and accepted by the community of nations in the region or the world. And Netanyahu could end that war. There's a way to do it. We've talked about it in the past. I won't spend any time on it. There's a way to do it. And that's the way I would recommend Trump approach it. You want us to help you destroy the Fordo facility? Well, we'll do that. But you've got to end this war in Gaza that is going to destroy your reputation of your country indefinitely, and that is going to prevent you from achieving any of the objectives you want to achieve.
Let me ask you then, because every time I look at a newspaper headline, hundreds of U.S. Foreign Service staff to lose their jobs, and we know that he's hollowed out national security, big bureaucracies that are tasked with these very difficult issues and to come up with, options to try to do what you're just saying, whether it's the State Department or whatever. Does he have the people now to be able to do this? Because it's all about Trump.
No, and Steve Witkoff, the one guy he trusts, is supposed to be responsible for everything. He's not even ever done foreign policy before, let alone high-level negotiations with Iran, with Israel, with Ukraine. I mean, it's madness to have this one guy trying to do everything. And he's unsupported by a responsible set of officials who can look to the long term, the next step. Trump is all tactics. And the Israelis are all tactics. They can do some dramatic stuff, but when it comes to the second, third, and fourth objective, they seem to be not as intelligent as their intelligence services
they don't want
are.
it, Jamie. Netanyahu's government and Netanyahu himself, his whole career has been about refusing a Palestinian state. Sorry, it has. And I know the Palestinians have said no to various other things. I understand that. But the people who are surrounding Netanyahu now have no interest in it. So maybe this is all that's what their strategy is. Anyway, we can discuss that another time because we don't know where this is going to go. I just want to maybe end by admitting, or not admitting, by repeating what we just said, that the Iranians always tend to over-negotiate and think they're such great negotiators. But when it comes to the people of Iran, I just want to say, when no matter how much you dislike a regime, when Iraq, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran back in 1980 and launched an 8-year brutal war, millions of people killed, chemical weapons used by Iraq, shipping stopped in the Straits of Hormuz, complete and utter chaos all over. My cousin, whose father was a general in the Shah's regime, he could have got out of fighting because he could have got an exemption because he had the contacts. But he said, I'm going to fight for my country. And he went for 2 years to the front. And he got injured several times. And it wasn't about the regime, it was about his country. It's a patriotism for your country. So I think that is maybe an answer to what some people think right now about, is this going to lead to immediate regime change? It might in the future, but at the moment it's a very, very complex situation for the people there. That is it, Jamie. That's all I have to say. That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
Goodbye, and thank you all for listening. And make sure you follow the feed so you never miss an episode. We'll see you on Thursday for our bonus episode where we answer your questions. So keep them coming. We do love hearing from you. And of course, you can listen to Christiane Amanpour and the X-Files with Jamie Rubin on Global Player, and you can download it from the app or go to globalplayer.com. That would be the app store you can download it from. I'm still getting my whatever pod language.
Anyway,
finesse.
this is a goodbye then, yes?
It's a wrap.